Hello, I'm Moocalian, and welcome to Painkiller Redemption. Let's go. Yes, our plot literally is badly written fanfiction. There are no cutscenes or anything, just that a couple of times. This is the level select screen. We'll jump straight into the first level. So I've cut out the loading screen controls. So you may recognise, if you're familiar with the series, some of these enemies, possibly some of the weapons. That tutorial's really annoying and gets in the way. There's no way to turn it off. But yes, the enemies, the weapons, even the maps are all reused. They produce basically no new content. The maps are in fact Painkiller multiplayer levels from the original game. And most of the enemies in this level are also from the original game. So basically all they've done is move things about a little, and they are selling their fan mod. So they start us with all the weapons, which is a little strange, but there we go. They don't give us much ammo though. You get a couple of ammo for each weapon, which isn't particularly useful when they're throwing this many enemies at you. You may notice that the enemies are mostly now getting hung up on the bodies, because this game likes to throw massive groups of enemies at you all at once, and eventually if you build them up they'll start to have collision issues and just sort of walk into a pile of their own dead friends rather than actually attacking you, which is one of the few saving graces which make the large crowds of enemies slightly less annoying to fight. So these flying guys, corpses on wings, are some of the most annoying enemies in the game. They're incredibly hard to hit. As you can see, I'm having quite a lot of trouble. And they like to throw them in massive groups, like everything else. So having to dodge out of the way when they're dropping area of effect damage on the floor, just waiting for you to accidentally bunny hop into them. Not nice. When, yeah, a bit easier when you've got sort of 2 or 3 of them in the original game. Not so much here when they've got 10 of them on the screen. I'm sort of trying out different weapons, see if I can get rid of them quicker, but you can't. These guys are pretty much the only threat on this level, at least for now. everything else is pretty easy to fight, but the guys with the blue staves, if you get too close to them, will slow you down, and it is quite easy to get trapped in a large room, as we'll see later. And that's really the only time you'll take damage, at least for the early sections. So, the main tactic in this game is to just bunch up all the enemies into one group, hit them with a rocket launcher, go collect all your souls, and then repeat. There's not a lot more to it, particularly again here, because this early section goes on for an awfully long time, not being terribly interesting, much like the rest of the game. So they don't give you a lot of ammo, particularly at this stage. So I'm trying to use different weapons, and the Razor Cube, which is the replacement for the Painkiller, stolen from the Painkiller Overdose game. Just coming down here to get a secret, which will break this level, more or less. This red and green thing gives me 100 extra health, and makes a lot of this pretty trivial, to be honest. But it's getting quite low on shotgun ammo, so it's quite a relief to find that. There's another one there, just in case you didn't get the health pickup from the secret, which is understandable, it is a secret. But in the end I actually don't find a use for it, because this section's still not really challenging enough, for the most part, to actually suck a lot of your health. Now, being slowed down is one of the threats here. The other threat, the scythe people, can shoot you, which disables you and means you can't fight back. So, it's a couple of seconds where you can't shoot anything, which for an FPS is not brilliant. Now, like a lot of this game, it's fairly passable when it's sort of in the smaller groups that you find in the original game, but when you're fighting a lot of them all at once, it becomes kind of annoying, particularly if you end up backed into a corner. So the guys with the red staff do damage over time rather than slowing you down. They are sort of a threat, but again, at the moment, not a particular problem. Got a nice large area to run away from them in. All stuck on the stairs, so I can just blow them up nice and easily. So you may notice I'm avoiding the souls on the ground for the moment. There is a reason for that. When you get 66 of them, and you can see at the top I've got 65, when you get 66 you go into a demon mode, which makes you more or less invincible, makes pretty much everything a one-hit kill, and I will need that later, because the first bit of many pieces of bullshit in this game is coming up soon. I'm not going to have time to get another 66 souls before then. So I've just got to try not to get it at this point. So you may notice me saving quite a lot. That's because, for a start, the game gets pretty bullshit at times, so save scumming has become sort of habitual over my practice run. Secondly, it's even worse when you're aiming for something, like not getting the demon mode quite yet, which is kind of a problem when you've got massive groups of enemies all dying and you need to avoid what they're dropping. So that over there, the big guy, this is why I've been saving the demon mode, because the pirates running around on the ground fairly quickly build up into massive groups. And frankly, fighting the mini-boss on his own is not very difficult. In fact, it's absurdly easy. But having to fight the group of soldiers as well as the mini-boss is really quite difficult, because you've got to concentrate on shooting the boss, and you've got a lot of fast-moving skeleton pirates trying to murder you. It was a little stupid of me blowing up an explosive barrel 10 feet in front of my face, but because I've got the health power up from before, it's really not particularly important. And there is another one there, so it wasn't really a problem. Although you would have thought that having had the mini-boss, they might then think that was a good time to end this area, which has been going on for a long time, much too long. That's another running theme in the game. Levels, sections going on for far too long, because the multiplayer levels were not as big as the original Painkiller levels. Understandably, you'd have far fewer enemies. You want to be taking advantage of your mobility. You wouldn't need large areas, particularly. So they really weren't designed for this. And as a result, the designers of this game, partly because of their design methods, which I'll discuss later, and we will see, and partly because they picked bad levels, they have had to try and lever in an awful lot of enemies into each area, which makes some areas kind of bullshit, and the rest of them just not very fun, very long, no checkpoints, which is why I'm save scumming, because should I mess this up, and it wouldn't be the first time or the last time, I would not want to have to replay this. At the moment I'm using the space when I've only got two guys chasing me to go try and hunt for a bit more ammunition, because for quite a lot of this game I will be running out, not having a lot, being a lot of enemies to shoot, and not a lot more ammunition than there was in the original game, where all the enemies were far smaller. Also me not keeping track. We are finally done with this section. It's taken way too long. Last look around for a bit more ammo. I missed a bit over here. It's nice to have found that. So you may notice that we're reusing a section of the last area. Again, the levels aren't quite as big as they were in the original game, so to compensate, there is quite a lot of going back to places we've already seen and using sections of previous areas. So this area is very easy to get cornered, massive groups of enemies, not an awful lot of space. I'm using the, frankly, ridiculously powerful severed head weapon, which most of the weapons here are taken straight from Painkiller Overdose. In fact, I think all the levels in this set are, although for some reason there are some weapons from that game that are not here. But that head, between the main fire, which runs down ammunition really slowly and is quite powerful, and its alt fire, which is also insanely powerful and we'll see in a bit, one of the best weapons in the game, particularly for getting out of scrapes. Although obviously you don't want to use it too much because ammunition is fairly scarce. It's not a good time to get this, but it's not so important now. I've got nothing in particular I want to use it to cheese through, so I may as well try and get rid of as many of these. Luckily this bit was nowhere near as long. Now that up there, we will be coming back to that later. It's just there as a tease for if you're playing on a higher difficulty or something and having lots of trouble. It's just mocking you, I think. Look at this health, oh, you can't get it. Now, that's not the most stupid thing about it. We will see that when we get back to it. For now, again, enemies getting stuck on their friends' bodies and stairs. That is a recurring theme in this particular section. Since, again, the basic premise is to just group up all the enemies and then go stand a bit away from them and put explosives into them. In this case, I'm using the alt fire of this gun, which is also quite powerful. It fires 5 grenades which will bounce off enemy shields and walls and things, and can take out quite a lot. So it's incredibly useful and I will be abusing it. There are explosive barrels flying everywhere. I'm not entirely sure what's causing them to just leap across the arena like this, but they can be useful for clearing out the large groups. So now we've seen pretty much every enemy we're going to see this level. There are only 4 or 5 of them, which would be about on par with the original game if perhaps they'd maybe bothered to make some new ones rather than using the same ones. rest assured, this level is not the last time we see any of these. They, instead of even stealing more enemies, of which there are plenty to take, the game, with very few levels actually, thank God, has very few enemies. Ends up reusing an awful lot of them. So now this is the first time we've seen the flying enemies and the normal groups, which is a little more interesting, but does make it a little awkward when they're dropping all their fire on the ground and you're trying to bunny hop away from groups of enemies on the ground. It's also worth pointing out that these guys don't drop souls as far as I can tell, which means that fighting them is basically a nuisance. Here you can see I'm looking for the soul and it's not turning up. Here I'm taking quite a lot of damage in the effort to get the demon morph, but as far as I'm concerned it's worth it because I don't have to fight through those guys normally, and it's not like health is particularly scarce at the moment. So you may notice that halfway through the video we've killed 503 enemies, which is more than pretty much any level in the original game, and it's more than double a lot of levels. So yeah, this game does a very good job of extending itself by just, instead of having large or interesting levels, they just bulk up the amount of enemies. And they actually managed to make Painkiller boring, which is probably the worst thing they could have done, as far as I'm concerned. It is reusing a lot of, well, the entire engine, assets, pretty much everything from other Painkiller games, yet it manages to be pretty much worse than any of them, by just reusing them far too much. But we are through this section now, so we'll finally get to see somewhere new. After I've gone and picked up all the ammo. Or not. The fake checkpoint was a gimmick they used in the other games, and they've already run out of ways to make it interesting, so halfway through the first level they're relying on gimmicks. And later on they will pretty much entirely give up gimmicks and just be boring. That guy spent quite a while jammed in the bodies of the others, and it was only when they disappeared and turned into the massive blood splat on the ground that he was able to get free from chasing them. Still, we are now done with that bit though. Or not. Oh, a tiny area, right. Well, at least I suspect they'll have something interesting to do in this tiny area. It definitely won't be spawning the easiest enemies to kill in the game in one spot for a while. Definitely not. Well, of course, not nearly as pointless as that. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Please do something interesting, game. And again, a tiny area. And all they've got is this tiny little mini-boss sort of guy, who pretty easy to kill when he's on his own. Does drop 5-6 health though, which is better than the one we've been getting, but not necessary. It's probably the easiest to find secret here, and you can get in there where you shouldn't be able to. Luckily a jump pad Now that power-up, there were power-ups in the original multiplayer levels, mostly they featured, and this particular one is the weapon mod power-up, which basically changes the function of all your weapons. But I haven't actually been able to find if they do anything. As far as I can tell, it does literally nothing, because it featured in the original game, where these weapons did not exist. So, as far as I can tell, it does not in fact change the weapons, because it was never programmed and they wouldn't have done anything as sensible or interesting or useful as adding in some functions, since they are going to be giving it to us. So, herd them, fill them with explosives, repeat. Not very interesting, I admit. That's more or less what I was thinking while playing this, in fact. Particularly since this is the third or fourth time I've been through this level. And I know pretty much where most of the spawns are and what they consist of. So, apart from a few moments where I mess up a little, not even particularly interesting or difficult to play. And it wasn't great at first, it's even worse now. So, the other thing they like to do is the pathfinding in this game is not fantastic, although again, that's as much a fault of the original game as it is of this, although slightly more pronounced when you've got so many enemies to get stuck behind things like walls, getting a little confused as to where you might be. And that was one of the aforementioned mistakes. I didn't realise it was going to end so soon, so I ended up in a massive group of people who were all carrying damage. I'll get hurt for touching them, which admittedly it wasn't very much, so it wasn't a problem, but was a little stupid. Now, you may have noticed when I killed them, they all drop their weapons on the ground, where they will persist for a couple of seconds and keep damaging you, which is a little bit of a problem when you have a massive group of them. As I've said, this game likes to do that a lot, so you will end up with large areas you can't walk through, and you'll end up in a corner getting hurt. So, no sooner did I kill that guy than they spawned new ones all over the map immediately next to me, which wasn't particularly interesting, but luckily other times they give you a little longer, like sometimes 5 or 10 seconds, which is, if anything, too long. I feel like perhaps there should have been some sort of QA to make sure that they were all roughly similar length. So, getting bored of fighting, just point the really powerful weapons into them. And this is its alt fire, which kills them so quickly that at points it does start to slow down my computer. On the plus side though, ridiculous amounts of souls just sitting wherever I fired it. So all through this area, that's been the safe spot where you can drag them through, but immediately upon finishing the previous wave, where you might well be in there, particularly if you're having to abuse it on higher difficulties, they're just going to spawn a bunch of people either side of you, and because of collision, it makes it quite difficult to escape. And I was probably lucky there. I think I lost quite a lot of health and armour, and that was probably one of the better times I've managed to get out of that. This isn't the first take of this area. This isn't even the second take. It's on top of all my test recordings and practice runs. It took me 2 or 3 goes to get through this bit because it's quite long and I forgot to save halfway through. So this is cut down from about an hour of footage, this video, so that's not including any of the loading screens and things. It's about an hour of me running in circles, shooting things, and then dying and having to repeat 5-minute sections again, which I will cut out for your viewing pleasure. Having got that right at the end of the level, and then just going to try and come back to get these, forgetting that they'd be there. And then the jump pad we hit earlier, now it's the way forward, so it has a blue particle effect thing going on. It's kind of important to remember that blue particle effect. We will be discussing that further a bit later. So, as an area which is effectively a big square, at least for the moment, this is somehow even worse, as if that were possible. Basically running in circles for a while. And apart from occasionally slowing down to try and grab something and having them run into me, not a lot happens. A lot of the time I will end up, you might notice, saving the last guy or the last couple of guys until the point at the end, and I can get them nice and close to me, and then play with the physics engine. Painkiller is basically a corpse physics simulator. Throw a whole load of enemies at you and let you burst them, split them into lots of different bits, and throw all those bits about. Which is fun in short bursts, or challenging bursts, but again, in uninteresting, overly long sections, not so much. I am quite surprised I managed to hit that guy. So this is without a doubt the worst weapon of this set. I think this is more or less the only time I use it. Its flamethrower thing does incredibly poor damage over time. You may be noticing that despite having poured it into the group of enemies flying just above me, they still don't die for quite a while. And you can occasionally see one falling out of the sky. So I'm not entirely sure where they went, because I'm pretty sure I didn't kill them all there. They seem to sort of vanish. That is a thing those enemies do. It's like sort of disappear in mid-air if you leave them for long enough, which is a bit weird. I would say it's poor design, possibly bad enemies. I can't really blame Eggtooth and Nordic, who made this game, but I can blame them for the choice of that guy, and I will. It's very much their fault. So this is where this area gets a bit more interesting, because you may notice that I've been shot a bit from higher up, and it's pointing me to enemies way out of the level. They've got these guys up there who do serve to get you into the cover a little, which is actually a reasonable decision. So, apart from being 1 or 2 hit kill on most enemies, and having the incredibly powerful grenade attack, this gun also has the zoom function, which means I can do that. So, it was pretty obvious you were supposed to go over that bridge. I've fallen down here, and pretty easy, I'm now stuck. So, I'm not an advocate of invisible walls, but if there were ever a time to use them, that might have been it. So this is another one of those sections which I really don't like. An awful lot of enemies in a small room, spawning them from all of the corners, so it's not like you can really try and hide around the outside. So I'm going to cheese it. I was quite lucky on this run that I managed to get the demon morph in here, so I can just skip the entire thing. And the demon morph also slows it down a little bit, which is a little annoying when they're spawning enemies and it feels quite slow, despite how massive of a rush it is, usually. All of a sudden you've got means to kill them, and they're turning up incredibly slowly. So, and then back over here. Or not. Actually, what we have to do is jump down. Now, before, jumping down would have just got us stuck. Here it is actually the way forward. And you can take full damage jumping down. If you jump off or go off the top edge and don't land on one of those ledges, you will take a little bit of full damage. Since there's a checkpoint, again, it's not too much of an issue because you do get full healed there if you're below 100 health. But so again, a tiny area where they're just going to fill us with dudes. But again, not particularly difficult, more annoying than anything else. So this section we've got a small area, and we will see a long corridor later, the next couple of waves, which I promise is in no way fun to fight in, or particularly useful. But first I'll have to run around picking up all the souls, because if I can get a demon morph, that would be nice. So that is what that guy does when he attacks. It just drags you to him, and considering his feet were covered in enemies, if I had been a little closer, I might have just got dropped straight into a crowd with no real way of getting out, and that was in fact one of the deaths I've cut out. So that power up there is an extra damage power up. It's kind of useful usually, but I've got the demon morph, so not particularly relevant. Although it does let us kill these guys a little faster, which is nice. Especially considering there are an awful lot of them. So yeah, this corridor is kind of like shooting a fish in a barrel, really. You just sit at this end and wait for the enemies all to run in at the other end. Not noticing there was a guy behind me. Got hit. I do that a lot. It doesn't really matter because I'm not on too bad a difficulty. So apart from the bullshit sections, of which the next level in particular is a bad offender, getting caught occasionally, as long as you don't do it too often, is fine. So this is the guy I cheesed earlier. He's a bit easier now. So here, instead of trying to get past him a cheaty way, I'm just going to show you how much of a bullet sponge he is and how annoying it is to fight. We poured an awful lot of rockets into him, and if I hadn't been so careful about collecting ammunition earlier, this might be a problem. Also note that I was stun locking him a lot. He does come back later in the game, and we will see stun locking even worse. It's way too easy to kill him. But we're not going to go into the end of the level. This is the secret we couldn't get earlier, and for some reason they think health, armor and ammunition would be useful right at the end of the level when there's nothing else to kill. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only time you can get it. And just sort of the final fuck you, going to make it a little more difficult to get back. Well, not difficult, but they're going to slow our progress down quite a bit. For no particular reason, they're going to spawn us away from where we spawned it into that. So, over 1,000 enemies. This counter takes a while to tick up. I will skip it in future, but I thought I'd just let you suffer it for once. Bored yet? That final secret I didn't show because it doesn't give anything useful. Double the ammo and ammo boxes, I will abuse that. Next time, magazines. Sadly, I don't have the gold to place that quite yet. See you next time.